Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your mini lecture on the causes and effects of the French and Indian War. To begin, there's some things that we want you to keep in mind. First is that Britain and England are referring to the same place. Britain is England, England is Britain. So whenever you hear the British, we're talking about the English, or whenever you hear English, we're talking about the British, because Britain is England, England is Britain, the British are English, the English are British. Additionally, with this lecture being about the French and Indian War, we need to make sure that you are clear on the name. The French and Indian War was called that because Britain, who was the winner in the war, was fighting against the French and their Native American allies in North America. Britain also had Native American allies, and they were the strong Native American Iroquois that are native to the New York region. Last but not least, for things to remember, prior to the French and Indian War in 1754, the colonies, England's colonies, pretty much were developing without any interference or strict enforcement of British law in the region. There wasn't a great deal of things happening that caught Britain's attention or that Britain felt they needed to be over there being aware of. So what happens is, early on in the life of the 13 colonies, these people living in the New England region, the Middle region, and the Southern region are enjoying a great sense of independence. They're developing their own lifestyles, their own economies, and with that they're developing also their own governments and ways of ruling their lives and organizing their lives. This later is going to become quite problematic because Britain is going to change from its policy of not interfering with the colonies, and it's going to look to strictly enforce British law. So, in a nutshell, prior to the French and Indian War, Britain has a policy of salutary neglect with its colonies. It's hands off, it doesn't get involved with what they're doing. But after the French and Indian War, things will change. Now, setting up the French and Indian War for you, it would be good to have a picture of what North America was like before 1763, and before 1754 for that matter. What we have are England and France controlling most of the territory in North America. Spain is also present in the region of present-day Mexico and southward into South America. We have three nations, very powerful for the most part, thriving in the Americas. As time goes on, people tend to look for more space, more opportunities for making money, and the colonists in the 13 colonies were no different. So these English colonists eventually start to push westward, looking for more land, more resources, and simply more space. But as they moved westward, they started to enter land that was controlled by France. And without any clear borders to state where the British line for the colonies was drawn and where the French line of territory began, a lot of conflicts developed between the British and the French colonists in North America. Now, these conflicts continued to grow larger and larger and larger as time went on, and more colonists from the 13 colonies moved over the Appalachian Mountains and into French territory. And at the same time, Britain was actually at war with France around the world, outside of the Americas. So this conflict, known as the French and Indian War, is going to become part of a larger conflict known as the 7 Years' War. In a nutshell, the French and Indian War was caused mainly by a competition over territory. For North America, it was the competition over the Ohio River Valley, which is west of New York and Pennsylvania in the present-day region of Ohio and Illinois. Now, the English colonists want to move west, as I said, for more resources. One of those resources that lay to the west is a great deal of animals that could be hunted for their furs that were in high demand back in Europe. The French, who have already been there taking advantage of the fur trade, do not want the English to come into their region because that's going to affect their profits negatively. So they want to keep the English to the east of the Appalachian Mountains, right along the coastline of North America. But keeping them there is going to be a bit difficult. The French are going to respond by this new English presence in the Ohio River Valley by building military forts as a protective barrier, but Britain is going to try to fight fire with fire, and they're going to send troops, especially many of these colonists that are living in the region, under the direction of George Washington, into the Ohio River Valley to kind of counteract this French military presence and these forts that are being built. Now, with this kind of direct and clear military action and fighting on both sides, what happens in North America is it becomes a full-fledged war, and therefore you have what's known as the French and Indian War break out in 1754. As I stated, this war becomes part of the larger war between Britain and France around the world, known as the 7 Years' War. So officially, 1754, we have war between the French and the English in North America. Now, the British are going to be victorious. They are going to show that they are the superior military force around the world, and they are going to defeat the French and France. And they are going to take a majority of France's colonial territories around the world, and especially in North America. For the war in North America, the French and Indian War, it officially comes to an end in 1760. But the treaty won't be hammered out and the details put down in writing until 1763. But the treaty that does result from this French and Indian War, part of the 7 Years' War between Britain and France, is going to create a great deal of change in North America. First, Britain gets Canada and all the land east of the Mississippi River. Now, New Orleans, which was once Spanish territory, is going to be returned to Spain and therefore become back part of New Spain due to some assistance that the Spanish gave the English during their war with France. England's going to get Florida from Spain through a negotiation, and what results and what happens is Britain now dominates in North America. Now, yes, Spain is still present in North America, but again, it's further south in the present-day area of Mexico and then on into South America. But in case of North America, Britain is in control. Now, as a colonist in the 13 colonies, with Britain winning the French and Indian War and understanding the terms of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, you would see it as an open gate to go westward and now plant the settlements that you hope to plant, taking advantage of the fur trade and the lifestyles and options for living that the Western territories would offer. So, under British control, English colonists flood the Ohio River Valley. But we must not forget that during the French and Indian War, it wasn't just the French fighting the British. You also had Native Americans, the Algonquin and the Huron, on the side of the French. And they didn't leave when France left, due to the terms of the Treaty of Paris, 1763. So the Native Americans resist this movement of colonists into the Western territories, and they get in constant fights. So it's kind of like history repeating itself. Déjà vu. The same thing is happening again. British colonists are moving westward. They're getting into conflicts with people out there. In this case, now it's the Native Americans. So what's going to have to happen is Britain's going to have to provide some type of security or defense for these colonists moving over there. So what happens is the fighting continues to break out as colonists move west with the Native Americans, and England is going to be forced to send more soldiers to defend the colonists. The problem that's going to develop is sending more soldiers to defend the colonists in North America is going to be very expensive. And it's going to be something that Britain, after fighting the 7 Years' War with France, isn't really able to do. Now, during this French and Indian War, Britain and the colonies fought side by side, and the Americans, the colonists of Britain, took great pride in being partners in victory with the French, or over the French. But unfortunately, as the war ended, problems developed. Britain wanted to govern the 13 colonies and the territories it gained from the French and Indian War in a uniform way. And this is going to cause some tension because the colonists have been so used to not having Britain strictly enforcing their laws in the colonies due to that policy of salutary neglect. So as the British Parliament in London, along with support from the King, imposes new laws and restrictions, the colonists are going to feel that their freedom is being limited. The first and foremost of these new British laws that are going to be strictly enforced is known as the Proclamation of 1763. Now, as you can see from the heading of this slide, moving west becomes a colonial problem. And the reason it becomes a problem is because Britain had spent and spent and spent and spent to the point where they were really on the verge of possible bankruptcy for the war with France. So they don't have really any more money in their treasury that they can devote to sending protection to the colonies. So in finding a solution to this, one could not necessarily depend on having money to be part of that solution. So what the king does is he issues the Proclamation of 1763. This proclamation states that settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains is banned. So all the colonists have to stay to the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains. So right along the coastline where they've been for years. Anybody who's already moved into the West, that includes those who've purchased land in the West from land surveyors and land developers, are going to be forced to move back east. Now, when one stands back, we can't really look at the king as being a bad person, because Britain wanted the land to the west to remain in the hands of the natives so that they could eliminate the conflicts that were developing between the Native Americans and the colonists as they moved westward. So, I guess you could say the king's heart was in the right place, but unfortunately for the colonists, this proclamation greatly angers them, because they had hoped to move into this fertile Ohio Valley, and now most of these colonists are being forced back into a territory where they A, have sold their land, or B, don't have room to now settle. So what's going to happen is your colonists are extremely angry. They've just fought several years for territory that they were hoping to use, and now they're being told that they can't use it. So, much like the Navigation Acts, these colonists are going to ignore the Proclamation of 1763, and they're going to continue moving westward. Unfortunately, unlike the time period of the Navigation Acts, Britain has a new tune that it's going to dance to. They're going to be strictly enforcing the laws they pass. And unlike the Navigation Acts, the Proclamation of 1763 and future laws are not just going to disappear or be able to be ignored by the colonists. So Britain increases its control over the colonies. Many colonists, as stated, are ignoring the Proclamation of 1763, and they're continuing to move westward. They think that this law, like previous British laws, are just going to be lightly enforced, so it won't matter. But times have changed. Britain needs to figure out a way in order to get soldiers over there to enforce its laws, but not affect its treasury, i.e., not spend money in doing it. So following the Proclamation of 1763, in order to make sure that they can send soldiers over to enforce the laws that they're going to be passing, Britain announces what's called the Quartering Act. In this Quartering Act, it requires American colonists to house and feed British soldiers stationed in America. Now, with this, you pretty much have the end of this period of salutary neglect by Britain, and they're going to continue from this point forward to seek ways to regulate life in the colonies with new laws. Many of these laws are going to be put into place because they feel that the colonists are not being loyal English citizens. And some of these laws are going to be put into place because Britain wants to help end its near bankruptcy state of being and raise some money to fill their banks back up from the war that they had with France. Either way, for whatever reasons these laws are being passed, whether they just to regulate the life of the colonists or to raise money for Britain, the American colonists are going to continually push back against the British. With that, we arrive at the end of the lecture.